Okay, so I want you to imagine something for a moment. Just picture this. You are a thermometer,
A thermometer. Okay, I'm with you.
and your whole job, your entire design is incredibly complex. You're meant to sense thermal energy, to feel the atmosphere, these tiny shifts in heat and cold that nobody else can even feel.
You're a precision instrument.
A precision instrument, exactly. But here's the thing. For your entire life, the only tool anyone has ever used to measure you is a ruler.
Ah, a rigid, straight-edged ruler.
Yeah. And because you don't have inches or centimeters or, straight lines, the people holding the ruler just look at you and they say, well, this thing's obviously broken. It's not measuring up and has no length.
That is, wow. It's a frustrating thought, but it's the perfect analogy for what we're getting into today. Because we're not just talking about using the wrong tool.
Yeah.
We're talking about how using that wrong tool actually erases the very thing you're trying to measure. It invalidates it.
That's the core of it, right? We are diving deep into a piece of writing today that basically demands we stop doing that. Stop measuring thermometers with rulers. We're looking at this really profound essay. It's called Legacy. We are here because autistics found each other. And it's by Jaime Hoerricks, a PhD. And I have to say, even just the subtitle,
Oh, yeah.
on whole memory minds, relational ecology, and cognitive freedom, that alone tells you we're stepping away from the usual conversation about neurodiversity.
We absolutely are, and I'm glad you pointed that out. Usually, we talk about accommodations or workplace adjustments, maybe inclusion.
Sure, all important stuff.
Very important. But Hoerricks is operating on a completely different level here. This isn't about how to fit autistics into the existing world. It's a philosophical, almost political argument about the nature of cognition itself.
It felt less like a medical text and more like, I don't know, a manifesto for cognitive freedom.
That's a great way to put it. That's what it is. And so our mission for this deep dive is to really sit with this argument for what Hoerricks calls narrative sovereignty.
Narrative sovereignty.
Yeah. We need to unpack what that means. The right to name your own experience. And to do that, we have to get into this incredible concept of the gestalt processor, or the whole memory mind.
Whole memory mind. I literally put a sticky note on that page.
Yeah.
It just challenges this whole idea that there's a normal way to process information and then a disordered way.
Right.
But before we get to the mechanics of it, let's talk about that power dynamic you just mentioned, narrative sovereignty.
It's a concept that really hits hard. Hoerricks writes, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, but there comes a point when the question is no longer whether something exists, but who gets to name it and whose language is allowed to count as real.
That's all about authority, isn't it? It's that old saying, history is written by the victors. But here, the history of autism has been written by the observers, not the people living it.
Precisely. For a century, the so-called truth about autism has been defined by institutions. Medicine, psychology, education.
The outsiders?
The outsiders, exactly. Systems designed to observe behavior from the outside. And Hoerricks argues that these institutions have, and this is a direct quote, never learned how to read us whole. They measure by systems that reduce field to fragment.
Reduce field to fragment. That phrase really stuck with me. Because it almost feels like an indictment of the scientific method, or at least how we use it. We're taught that to understand something, you break it into its smallest parts.
You isolate variables.
Right. But what Hoerricks seems to be saying is that when you do that to a human mind, to this kind of human mind, you actually destroy the meaning.
You lose all the context. Think about it. If you take a sentence and you cut it up into individual words, and then you analyze the frequency of the letter E, you'll have data, you'll have facts. But you've completely lost the story. And the argument here is that the medical model has been just analyzing the letters while completely missing the poetry. They are, quote, narrated by frameworks that mistake coherence for disorder and depth for delay.
Wow. Okay. Mistaking coherence for disorder. So the internal experience of the autistic mind is coherent. From the inside, it makes perfect sense.
Yes.
But because the observer is speaking a totally different cognitive language, they just label it as chaos, as broken.
And that's where the deficit comes from. But the deficit isn't in the person, it's in the observer's inability to understand what they're seeing. The institution creates this file, this permanent record that claims to be about the person.
But it's not.
It's actually describing the institution's own confusion.
It's the ruler blaming the thermometer for not having inches.
Exactly.
Okay, so if the institutions are getting it so wrong by focusing on these fragments, let's talk about what the text says is actually going on. How do these minds work? Because Hoerricks uses these very specific terms, like gestalt processors.
Right, and context-saturated knowers. This is the part that I think forces us to rethink how we even define intelligence. We live in a world that just prizes linear processing.
Absolutely.
Step A leads to step B, leads to step C. It's bottom up. You gather all the details, you line them up, and eventually you build a conclusion.
That's how school works.
Yeah.
That's how you write a report. It's how we expect a conversation to go, really.
It is. But a whole memory mind, a gestalt processor, it basically works in reverse. It's top down.
Yeah.
And Hoerricks describes it so beautifully. For these minds, meaning arrives as pattern before part, atmosphere before sentence, recognition before explanation.
Atmosphere before sentences. Okay, let's try to make that concrete for people listening, because I think this is where so much misunderstanding happens in the real world.
Okay, yeah, good idea. Let's use an analogy. Think about how images used to load on the internet in the 90s versus how they load now.
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah.
The dial-up days. The slow crawl.
The slow crawl. So back then, an image loaded linearly, right? You'd get the top inch of the photo in perfect high detail, then the next inch, then the next.
Part by part.
You were building it part by part. If you stopped it halfway, you knew exactly what the top of someone's head looked like, but you had no clue if they were standing on a beach or in a kitchen.
That's linear processing, bottom up.
Exactly. Now think about modern blur uploading. When you click on a photo now, what happens? You often get the entire image instantly, but it's blurry.
Right, you see the whole shape of it.
You see the colors, the shapes, the composition. You know it's a beach scene immediately. You have the whole. Then, over the next few seconds, all the details sharpen into focus.
So that's gestalt. You get the whole picture, the atmosphere first.
Yes. Hoerricks is saying the autistic mind gets the blur up.
Mm-hmm.
They perceive the vibe of a room, the emotional tone, the pattern of a social interaction. They get the whole thing instantly, but they haven't rendered the specific pixels yet.
They haven't found the words, the sentence, to explain the atmosphere they're already feeling.
And that, right there, explains the so-called delay, doesn't it?
It explains everything. In a linear world, you ask a question, you expect an immediate linear answer, you want that top inch of the photo.
But the Gestalt processor is holding this entire blurry, context-rich image in their head, trying to resolve all that detail into language that a linear person can even understand.
So when a kid is silent in the classroom, or an employee pauses for a long time in a meeting, the assumption is they don't know, or they're slow.
Right.
But Hoerricks is arguing, no, they know more. They're processing this massive amount of context-saturated data.
Context-saturated, that's the key. The pause isn't emptiness, it's density. It's what the text calls coherent wisdom, not a disorder. But because the output isn't instant and linear, the system just marks it down as a deficit.
That is such a critical reframe. It changes the silence from a lack of ability to a surplus of perception.
Oh.
But it also sounds exhausting.
Oh, incredible.
If you're constantly perceiving the atmosphere, but the world is always demanding the sentence, you are basically living in a state of permanent translation.
You are. And that translation has a huge cost. Hoerricks argues that if you have a mind that works this way, pattern before part, but you're forced to perform part before pattern just to survive, you're being forced to dismantle your own way of knowing. You're translating your own existence into a language that doesn't actually fit you.
And when you inevitably fail to translate it perfectly,
well, that's when the labels come out.
that's when we get to what the text calls the deficit dialect.
Yes.
Yeah, we have to talk about this section. The tone really shifts here. It stops being so poetic and it gets incredibly sharp, very direct. Hoerricks talks about how these lives get recorded.
It's a fierce critique of the public record, really.
Yeah.
The text says autistic lives have been translated into deficit dialects. The language used to describe them is purely negative. It's all defined by what's missing, never by what's there.
The list of labels she uses is it's brutal.
Yeah.
Socially broken, relationally incapable. And the one that really stopped me was evolutionarily expendable.
Evolutionarily expendable. It gives you a chill because it sounds so pseudoscientific, like it's a judgment from nature itself.
But the argument here is that these aren't just neutral observations. She claims these categories are actually built for a specific purpose: containment, remediation, or quiet disappearance.
And that's the sociopolitical angle that you just can't ignore. Hoerricks is arguing that these medical files, the educational reports, all the things written about autistics, they aren't descriptive, they're colonizing.
Colonizing. That's a very, very charged word. It implies an invasion, a takeover.
It does, and it's used deliberately. When a colonial power enters a new land, what's one of the first things they do? They rename everything, they ignore the local knowledge, the local way of life, and they impose their own map on top of it.
They say your way is savage, our way is civilized.
Exactly. Hoerricks is saying that neuronormativity does the exact same thing to the autistic mind.
So when a report says a child is being non-compliant or is fixated on something, that's the colonizer's language. It's putting a foreign map onto that child's territory.
Precisely. And she goes even further, calling it eugenic, which suggests that the ultimate goal of all this language is to prove that these people should not exist. When you label an entire group relationally incapable, you're effectively calling them a dead end. You're justifying their removal.
It's designed to shrink the range of who is allowed to exist.
That's the line. It's not just about being misunderstood. It's about having your very humanity edited out of the story.
And if the only language that's allowed to count as real is that linear, non-autistic language, then the autistic experience is just. It's effectively erased. It becomes invisible.
You either perform normalcy or you are pathologized. There's no middle ground.
This all feels so overwhelmingly heavy. If the whole system is rigged to only see deficits, where's the hope? Because the title of the essay is actually pretty optimistic. Legacy. We are here because autistics found each other.
And this is where we get to the idea of relational ecology. And honestly, this is the part of the essay that I think is the most revolutionary, because it's a direct counterpunch to that label of socially broken.
Right. The stereotype is that autistic people are antisocial or they lack empathy. But relational ecology sounds like a whole ecosystem of connection.
It is. Hoerricks is describing a lineage. She's saying, look, despite the containment, despite the attempts to make us disappear, we survived. And the reason we survived is because we found each other.
It almost paints a picture of a parallel society. Like, while the institutions were busy writing reports about how these people couldn't connect.
The people were busy connecting just in ways the institutions couldn't see or measure.
Okay, that makes sense.
Think about it with another analogy, radio frequencies. Let's say the entire world is broadcasting on AM radio, and you're built to receive FM. The AM world looks at you and says, this radio is broken. It's receiving nothing but static. It's silent.
But then you pick up another FM signal.
And suddenly the airwaves are full. That's relational ecology. It's the idea that autistic connection just looks different. It might be parallel play, it could be shared silence, it might be info dumping facts about something you love as a sign of affection.
But it's rich.
It's rich and it is deep. And this isn't just a new thing on the internet. Hoerricks argues this is a historical legacy. Autistics have always found each other. In monasteries and engineering guilds and art collectives, they created these little ecosystems where their whole memory minds were an asset, not a problem.
So relational ecology is the counter-argument to relationally incapable. It's saying, we are profoundly capable of relation, just maybe not on your terms.
And that ties right back to cognitive freedom. The freedom to exist as a context-saturated knower without being shoved into a fragmented box. The right to say, my relationships are valid even if they don't look like yours. My processing is valid even if it's slower to come out in words.
It's the thermometer finally smashing the ruler and saying, I will tell you the temperature in my own language, thank you.
Or even better, I'll tell you things about the atmosphere that your ruler could never ever measure.
Which brings us to this whole idea of reframing the narrative, right? Moving from seeing symptoms to seeing wisdom. The text calls for a field-first opening.
A field-first opening, which means we need to stop starting with the little details, the eye contact, the fidgeting, the tone of voice, and start with the field. The whole person, the whole context. If we do that, Hoerricks argues, we'll find coherent wisdom.
We talked about that translation cost earlier. The energy it takes to turn that blur-up picture into linear sentences. It feels like this is a call for a ceasefire on that demand.
It is. She's basically asking, why does the burden of translation always have to fall on the minority? Why must the autistic mind strip itself down to be understood by the linear mind?
Why doesn't the linear mind try to learn to read the pattern?
Yes, that's the huge shift. The deficit isn't in the person's inability to speak. It's in the system's inability to listen. It's a failure of translation on the part of the majority.
We're looking at depth and calling it delay.
We're looking at pattern recognition and calling it obsession. We're getting it wrong, and in doing so, we are harming people.
So let's just zoom out for a second.
Yeah.
We've gone from narrative sovereignty, the right to name your own reality, to gestalt processing, seeing the atmosphere before the sentence. We've confronted this deficit dialect and then found hope in relational ecology.
It's a complete overturning of the standard model.
It really is. And it sort of leads me to this final thought that isn't explicitly in the text, but it feels like the logical next step of everything Hoerricks is saying.
Go on.
Well, we live in a world of these massive, complex, interconnected problems, right? Climate change, global economics, geopolitical instability. These aren't linear problems. You can't solve them by looking at one fragment at a time.
They're systemic. They're atmosphere problems.
That's a fascinating connection. So you're saying these are problems that actually require whole memory thinking.
Exactly. What if we have a subset of the human population that is biologically wired to see the pattern before the part, to grasp the whole system almost instantly?
Yeah.
Are we just shooting ourselves in the foot by suppressing them?
If we force the very people who can see the whole picture to spend all their energy chopping that picture into little linear strips just to satisfy the school system or the corporate world, what insights are we losing?
What solutions are dying in translation?
That's the ultimate question. If Hoerricks is right, and this is coherent wisdom, then we aren't just being unkind by ignoring it. We're being reckless. We are wasting a form of intelligence that might be exactly what we need right now.
Maybe it's time we stopped asking them to do all the translating.
And started learning their language instead.
I think that's exactly where this work leaves us.
A huge thank you to Jaime Hoerricks for this incredible essay. And thanks to you for helping me unpack it all.
A pleasure, as always.
And to you, the listener. Next time you see a delay, maybe ask yourself, are they stuck or are they just seeing more of the picture than I am? We'll see you in the next deep dive.